Hello YouTube, this is GeekyAustin, and welcome to my review of Godzilla King of the Monsters, directed by Michael Dougherty. Now, before we begin, I just want to make a quick announcement to my fellow subscribers. I do want to apologize for my 2-month hiatus. For about the last month and a half, I have had a small flu, and this flu has screwed up my voice, my sinuses, my head, and my ears. Meaning that, yeah, I was bummed out of luck of doing any reviews, and there were a lot of Godzilla figures that I wanted to review and have not been able to. But now that I am feeling a lot better, eventually I will get to them, and again I do apologize for the long wait. Okay, so as I said, Godzilla King of the Monsters was directed by Michael Dougherty, and it stars Kyle Chandler, Vera Farmiga, and Millie Bobby Brown as Dr. Mark Russell, Emma Russell, and Madison Russell, Charles Dance as Colonel Alan Jonah. Several other cast members are in here, along with returning characters from 2014's Godzilla, like Ken Watanabe as Dr. Ishiro Serizawa. As mentioned, this movie is a direct sequel to 2014's Godzilla, taking place 5 years after the events of that film. And in the film, Godzilla must confront 3 of his most famous foes, Rodan, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, in an attempt to save the planet after being released by a group of terrorists. So, overall, this movie was actually pretty fun. I heard very early on about all the negative reviews, about just the downright negative votes from the critics that this movie was getting, and it did hurt my spirits just a little bit, but I went into this movie with low expectations and came out very, very pleased. But is this movie a perfect Godzilla movie? Not really. The biggest problem with this movie are with its characters and its story. The characters, all of the characters, are not very good. They are poorly written, but in my eyes, they're not so poorly written in a bad way. It's just in a typical, average Godzilla movie way. If you watch any average Godzilla movies from the Heisei or Millennium series, then that's kinda what the acting in this movie feels like. It's not awful, but it's not good either. It is very passable. I do enjoy the characters. There are a few that could have been better. For example, 2 characters, Sally Hawkins' character, Dr. Vivian Graham, who again is a returning character from the previous film, she dies in this movie. And sadly, her death in the movie is glossed over so quickly that unless you were looking at her, you won't even notice that she died. It's really sad. It would have been nice if her character was done just a little bit better. And then the only other character that I found just a little bit annoying but not awful was Thomas Middleditch as Dr. Sam Coleman. His character is one that I really can't describe. He's not annoying, but at the same time, he doesn't make sense. Most of his jokes don't fit in. He's a comedy relief character that I felt was just a little eh. And then, of course, as for the story, the biggest flaw with the story is that it was very predictable. When I saw the trailers for the movie, I managed to guess about 85% of the movie just by looking at the trailers, and I was correct. Everything that you would expect is what happens. Mothra is released, Ghidorah is released, Ghidorah and Godzilla fight, Rodan gets released, Ghidorah and Godzilla fight again, Ghidorah manages to knock Godzilla down, and Godzilla transforms into his new form, which is very based on his meltdown form in Godzilla vs. Destroyer, and Godzilla finishes off Ghidorah in one final move. I managed to figure that all by looking at the trailers. So, like I said, a little disappointing, but at the same time, the main thing that the story has got going for it is that it's very simplistic. It's not too convoluted or hard to follow. At least for me it wasn't, and I'm kinda glad about that. And where the problems with the story are, there's also the problems with things that it introduces. And the main one that could have been executed way better is of course the Oxygen Destroyer. The Oxygen Destroyer is in this movie, which was a really nice nod and callback to the original Godzilla. I had a smile on my face when they introduced it, but in the end, there was no build up to it. It just pops up out of the nowhere, out of the blue, and is launched into Godzilla and Ghidorah, and doesn't even kill either of them. And to me, I felt that was such a letdown, and it could have been a lot better. And honestly, this here is what I would have done. Take the Oxygen Destroyer and have it used against Godzilla, but it doesn't work. Later on in the film, it is shown that Dr. Serizawa had a notebook containing, of course, his notes about his findings on Godzilla and maybe other things inside of it. Have it revealed that Dr. Serizawa had notes on improving the Oxygen Destroyer or making a better Oxygen Destroyer that he took before he realized that Godzilla was not a threat. Have it work like that, and then all of a sudden now, the notes are out there in the open. Anybody now can see them and build their own Oxygen Destroyer. Like I said, to me, I think that would actually fix this issue and would actually kinda work really good in a sequel. That's how I feel anyways. But anyways, those were my negatives. Not a whole lot. They don't hurt the film as bad as I thought they would, but they're still there. They're still a bit annoying. But what this movie succeeds in is absolutely its action, special effects, the soundtrack, the portrayal of the monsters, and the overall respect to the Godzilla franchise. Every single instance of the movie when the monsters are on screen, it is nothing but eye candy, entertainment, and absolute Godzilla lore. The action is fast and energetic, and it reminds me of the early Showa Godzilla films. Because in the early Showa Godzilla films, most of the fighting was all hand-to-hand combat in close quarters. Barely any beam fights or weapon fights or anything like that. So that's exactly what this movie offered, a lot of close quarter, hand-to-hand combat. And a lot of the action is shot from the ground up, giving you very close perspective of the monsters, and to some, I understand that this comes off as a bit of like bad filmmaking or annoying, but to me it is awesome because never before in a Godzilla movie have we seen so much of this. With CGI, you can now easily make shots like that. You can have ground level perspective of these monsters as they fight, and it makes you feel like you're in the middle of the fight. Now, would I want this in any other Godzilla movie? Not really. I would like to have a lot of far away panning shots as well, but for the close-up stuff, I liked it in this movie a lot. And as I mentioned, the special effects in the movie were all really good. The CGI looked pretty top-notch for a good majority of it. There were a couple of shots of Ghidorah that could have been better, but still, overall, I did like it. But as I stated, yes, the soundtrack by Bear McCreary, you nailed the soundtrack. I had already listened to the soundtrack before the movie, and all in all, it is one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. It has the right mix of heart-stopping music, Godzilla lore and attention, and downright awesomeness, basically. The only downside is that it does kinda feel muddled with all the other sound effects and all, but this is mostly what happens to soundtracks in movies. In most big blockbuster summer movies, the soundtrack now and then can be muddled by the other sound effects. It's going to happen. And here, it didn't bother me that much because the more important tracks like Godzilla's theme, Mothra's theme, they were front and center. I was able to hear them being played throughout the movie. And yes, the monster's portrayal and the respect to the overall Godzilla franchise. Again, big shout out to Michael Dougherty here. He did a great job. The personality of King Ghidorah is honestly, in my mind, one of the most diabolical and sinister Ghidorahs we have ever gotten. This Ghidorah not only can grow its head back when it's cut off like a Hydra, this Ghidorah actually licks the victims that he kills, and when I saw that, I had a laugh under my breath and like, that is awesome. This Ghidorah is ruthless. And not only is Ghidorah ruthless, but Godzilla is ruthless. This Godzilla does not play around. And again, that's the number one thing that I enjoyed about this movie. Every monster's personalities are awesome. Mothra's personality throughout the entire film is what you would expect of Mothra. She is beautiful looking, she sounds beautiful, she's very freaking awesome, and in the end she sacrifices herself to protect Godzilla like you would expect Mothra would do. All in all, her portrayal is just perfect. And Rodan is really good as well. The only thing is that there's not much you can do to mess up Rodan because Rodan's entire character is pretty simplistic. All that you need to do is just make a Pteranodon and just give him a personality, and that's what Rodan is. Rodan's personality in the film is like that of Starscream from Transformers, which is something that I laughed at, because it's true. When Rodan is released from the volcano, he lunges out at King Ghidorah like Starscream would at Megatron, and he gets his butt whooped and realizes that he is not as powerful as he thought he was, and has to bow down to his Lord Ghidorah, and later to his Lord Godzilla. And yeah, that was another thing that I did like. The imagery of Godzilla at the end of the film was just awesome. At the end of the film, all the monsters gather around Godzilla and bow at him, and Godzilla roars with his hands out, declaring, "I am your new king." It is some awesome imagery, and I enjoyed it. It put a huge smile on my face. And of course, the other thing that this movie has going for it is that this movie is a love letter to older Godzilla fans. There are tons of nods to previous Godzilla films. For Godzilla 1954, we have the opening credits. At the beginning of this movie, you can clearly hear a boom, boom, and then another boom, and then it cuts to black and you hear Godzilla's iconic roar. A 100% shout out to the original 1954's opening credits. And then you have Dr. Serizawa's sacrifice. And this one might be just a little far-fetched, but this is what I see. In the movie, Dr. Serizawa sacrifices himself in order to revive Godzilla so he can save the world. In the original 1954 Godzilla film, Dr. Serizawa sacrifices himself in order to protect the world from the dangers of the Oxygen Destroyer. That connection may be a little far-fetched, but it's what I noticed when looking at the movie. And then of course you got a shout out to Invasion of the Astro Monster with Ghidorah being called Monster Zero. You have shout outs to the Heisei Godzilla films like 1991's Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, where the military revives a dying Godzilla with a nuke. A huge shout out to Shindo doing the exact same thing to revive what he thought was a dormant Godzillasaurus at the bottom of the Bering Sea. Then of course later on in the film, you have an awesome shot of King Ghidorah grabbing Godzilla and lifting him up into space and dropping him into the atmosphere. Again, another really awesome scene in the movie. And during this scene, Ghidorah is using a neck hold on Godzilla, replicating what Ghidorah did in 1991. And it's, again, another nice little shout out. And then you got a couple of shoutouts to 1993's Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. The end credits scene shows Colonel Alan Jonah arriving in Mexico to excavate a deceased Ghidorah head, and the way that it is shot is perfectly similar to the opening scene of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 when the G-Force is walking up to Mecha King Ghidorah's deceased head. Again, another nice little nod. And then, of course, later in the movie, like I mentioned, Mothra sacrifices herself to help Godzilla. What Mothra does is she flies in front of Ghidorah, Ghidorah zaps her, and Mothra's energy explodes and falls into Godzilla's body. And this here is a nod to not only 1993's Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, where Rodan revives Godzilla in a similar method, but it is almost shot for shot similar to 2001's Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All Out Attack, where Mothra flies in front of Godzilla this time and sacrifices herself and her energy is bestowed onto King Ghidorah. In other words, they did a role reversal with Godzilla and Ghidorah for this shot. So yeah, all in all, the movie has a lot of good things going for it. Like I said, the action is well paced, it is fast and energetic, the special effects look great, the soundtrack is a musical treat to the ears, the portrayal of all the monsters is really good and respectful to their characters, and speaking of respect, like I said, there is ton of respect and lore to the Godzilla franchise for Godzilla fans to look at and enjoy. And lastly, the only other thing to mention is that the new Titans that were revealed are interesting. There are a couple of different monsters. You got a giant spider that's of course supposed to be Kumonga, but instead of named that, it's named Scylla or Skyla. Again, very weird name, but it's pronounced something like that. And then you have the Behemoth. The Behemoth is like a mix between a gorilla and a mastodon. It is very weird looking, but I kinda like the looks of it. It is kinda unique. There's not a whole lot of mammalian kaiju in the Godzilla series. So anyways, overall, like I said, the movie does have a lot of good things going for it that makes me very happy to have watched it, and it's a movie that I feel that I will gladly watch over and over again. I've already seen the movie 3 times, and with each viewing I have noticed other things, and the movie has honestly gotten a bit better. But still, my negativity towards it are still the same. Like I said, I still feel that a couple of the characters are poorly written. All of them could have been wrote better, of course. The story was very predictable, which is a little disappointing, and of course the Oxygen Destroyer I felt could have been executed way better. And I only hope that for a sequel they do that. For a sequel, if you make the Oxygen Destroyer better, if you do anything with that nod that you gave at the end of the film with Ghidorah's head, and hint at maybe a Mecha King Ghidorah or even an evil Ghidorah clone, then all I can say is go for it. And heck, after the Oxygen Destroyer is used, a lot of dead fish start rising up out of the sea, and the end of the film mentions that food is becoming scarce when it comes to the fish population. And all that I can think of in my head is that there is a huge door open there for a possibility of Hedra arriving to the scene. So if you want to add Hedra into a future Godzilla film, by all means, Legendary Pictures, please do it. All that I hope for is that the Monsterverse doesn't go away after Godzilla vs. Kong, because this is a good potential for American fans to continue to get Godzilla movies. Now, would I like better Godzilla movies in the future? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, the only thing that I really want from a Godzilla film is a Godzilla film. I want a Godzilla film that is fun and action-packed, entertaining with a good soundtrack, and a good enough story that is not absolutely ridiculous. So overall, I'm going to give this movie a 4 out of 5 or a B. Not a bad movie, but yes, it could have been better, but in the end, I had fun with it. I absolutely enjoyed it, and the movie has gotten better with each viewing, and I only hope that fellow Godzilla fans might feel the same way. But if you don't, then I really do understand. And thank you guys so much for listening and watching. This has been Geeky Austin.